Good morning, everybody. It is the Planning and Community Development Committee for Thursday, March 12th, 2020. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for being here, and take a moment to acknowledge that we are within the territory of the Sea-Shelton First Nation. We are also testing video recording today. Hopefully it'll be posted to the website later if there's no glitches. So before we get going, you're not Andreas. And Director Ties is missing today, so I need a motion to appoint Len as the vice chair for today's meeting. Moved? Seconded? Anything you want to say on the matter, Director Lee?
No, I'm fine.
All right. All those in favor? Great. Thank you very much. Looking at adoption of the agenda, is there anything anybody would like to add or modify or change on the agenda? No. Motion to adopt the agenda. Moved. Seconded. All those in favor? Great. Thank you very much. Just before we move into our delegation today, can I have a motion to receive all reports, minutes, and correspondence? Moved. Seconded. All in favor? Great. Thank you very much. So moving on to item 2, delegation from Maria Stanborough, Principal Consultant of C&S Planning Group. Welcome. Just turn on the microphone, and I understand we're using the projector today.
Yes, we are.
All right, so we will part the C's.
Is there? Good morning, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to present. I'm presenting on the Sunshine Coast Child Care Action Plan, and as mentioned, I was the lead on this. From C&S Planning Group, I'm an urban planner. I've been working in community, sustainability, health, and wellness for more than 10 years. Part of the team also was John Foster, who is a senior planner, 35 years plus experience in social planning. He was a planner who initiated childcare in Burnaby. So he has lots and lots of experience in this realm. And also Liquor Geospatial, Aaron Liquor, provided the mapping that will also be part of this presentation this morning. So in terms of the Childcare Action Plan, since 2018, the province of BC has dedicated $1.3 billion to improve childcare across the province. And towards this, the town of Gibsons, the district of Sea-Shelton, and the Sunshine Coast Regional District partnered to secure funding to oversee the action plan. And the project started in mid-July, and it concluded in February in terms of the final report being completed, and with presentations in March. And the key objectives were to understand the issues to providing quality, affordable, and accessible childcare on the Sunshine Coast and make recommendations for improvements. So the words quality, accessible, and affordable are really the mandate of the province. So that is the language that flows through the final report. The steps taken was research and data collection from July to November. We also did extensive community consultation from September to November. And I just want to highlight that the community consultation was very successful. There was a lot of participation from the general community as well as from childcare providers. So it gave us a really sound basis for our research. And then we analyzed and came up with targets for childcare spaces, which I'll touch on shortly. And then drafted 5 recommendations which were reviewed and supported through the steering committee. And the steering committee included representation from the SCRD. So our key findings were, as a snapshot of the fall of 2019, full-time licensed daycare, and this excludes preschool. For children from birth to 3 years old, there were 62 spaces for 580 children on the Sunshine Coast. So approximately 1 in 9, or 11% of children. For children 3 to 5, there's more full-time daycare available, 294 spaces for 665 children, so approximately 1 in 2.5. Still fairly low, 44% of children of that age have access. And this is really a target population as well, because parents have gone back to work. They're really looking for support for when their children aren't in school yet and you know, they can't be around. And from 6 to 12, this is for before and after school care, and this is where the numbers were actually the lowest on the Sunshine Coast. So 157 spaces for 1,720 children, so approximately 1 in 11 or 9% of children. In terms of how does the Sunshine Coast compare to the rest of the province, these are some comparison communities. Tried to find some similar population and demographics. Same as the Comox Valley, which is another study that we completed. Very similar demographics, young families, very spread out population, just challenges in getting staff, that sort of thing. So the BC average right now is 18%. That might have improved in the last little while. The Canadian average is 27%, and that's really buoyed by Quebec, which has a universal childcare system. And in terms of the mapping, we provided this to give you a sort of a very visceral response, view of childcare on the Sunshine Coast. So for children under 3, this is what it looks like. When you're looking at more of the urban or the rural areas, there's a real lack of access to childcare. This is within a 20-minute drive. And in the more concentrated areas, there is more childcare, but again, it's quite low. This is for children from 3 to 5, again, within a 20-minute drive, and you see this sort of similar demographics. The gray areas are where Stats Canada didn't have any data for that age group. And then for before and after school care, very similar again. And then we looked at, the province wanted us to understand more at-risk or marginalized populations. So we created a composite study of low-income, people who spend more than 30% of their income on rent, First Nations, and visible minorities, and looked at where that population is most concentrated and most at risk. And not surprisingly, it's really in downtown Sea Shelter, in the center of the SCRD area. So the causes for the lack of childcare that we found, the biggest cause was the lack of staff. Early childhood educators are not paid well, and the average is about $17 an hour. They require a college diploma. If they are doing infant toddler care or any extra support needs, they need an additional diploma. It's a very, very demanding job, and it was pointed out to us that you could work on the Sunshine Coast cleaning houses, making $25 an hour, having that kind of freedom and flexibility, whereas in childcare you might be only making $17 an hour. Changing demographics, I think the biggest one for all of Canada, and especially in BC, we're seeing this, is that we've got both parents, or every parent is working because they need to provide support for their families. So you don't have someone able to stay at home with the children. Lack of extended family to provide support. You know, people are more splintered or moving, and then young families have been moving to the Sunshine Coast. And we heard that a lot from people who said, we came here, we thought this would be a good place to come to raise our family, and what we found is that there's not childcare for our family. And from the childcare provider's perspective, it's a very complicated system to navigate. I'm just going to really highlight this in terms of the different departments and ministries they have to work with. So the Ministry of Children and Family Development is your main ministry that oversees childcare at this point, but they also have to work with the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority for licensing. They have to work with local governments in terms of getting permits, zoning, all those requirements. If they're a nonprofit, they have to have a nonprofit board, which is also very challenging for some of them. If they are providing, childcare near a school or before and after school care, they're working with the school district, and all this while doing the very complicated work of childcare support. So our recommendations, and again, these were drafted with the steering committee. So we came up with these targets for childcare spaces. They are ambitious, but we looked at the research, we looked at comparables, and this is the number that we came up with, and it was supported by the steering committee. So an additional 180 full-time licensed daycare spaces for children from 3 to 5, an additional 380 full-time licensed daycare spaces for children up to 3 years old, an additional 900 spaces for licensed before and after school care for children 6 to 12. And the good news, I guess, story from this is that for before and after school care, you can have a greater ratio of children to staff. So there is a potential to provide that in the long term. Again, there's the issue of providing enough staff for that work. So advocate for a universal childcare system. So that's the quality, affordable, accessible childcare that the province is investigating and continues to say they will support, but has not yet been implemented. And from what I understand, we're looking at least 2021 for this to become more of a reality for all of BC. So the issue of staffing is really, really pertinent. So the third recommendation is to continue to develop initiatives to attract and retain early childhood education workers. So this is primarily a provincial responsibility. There are federal initiatives that affect this. The local government can have a role by doing things like securing spaces for childcare facilities that are low cost or no cost, and that allows a childcare provider to put more funds towards staffing. And generally, this idea of creating a streamlined approach to childcare across British Columbia, but on the Sunshine Coast, was really, really endorsed by the childcare providers we talked to. And Sharon Gregson, who's one of the strongest advocates for childcare in BC, looks at childcare as being needed, being housed under the Ministry of Education. So in terms of a universal system, it would be just like the education system. And there's information in the report about how that would fit in. And then the fifth recommendation is to create a joint childcare committee for the Sunshine Coast. And I want to really highlight that you have a fantastic strategic advantage in that on the steering committee there were representatives from the SCRD, from Gibson's, and from Seasheld. And in our experience, and especially in John's experience with 35 plus years in this field, he just felt that was fantastic to start off with that kind of support from the local governments. And there was also a representative from Vancouver Coastal Health, Sunshine Coast Community Services, CAPU, that offers childcare programs, local businesses, and School District 46. And in speaking with the steering committee, they supported the idea of rolling over their roles and responsibilities into the joint childcare committee if that is supported by the local governments. In the report, there are some recommendations on the work the Joint Child Care Committee could do. Again, these are just recommendations and just a framework to look at how they can be acting and implementing their roles. And that is the presentation, and I'm here for any questions or comments. And I understand there's a report from staff as well.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions for our presenter? Director McMahon?
Hi. I have written business plans for daycare, so I know what the margins are. They're terrible. The facility and staffing requirements are so high that the only place that the operators can make it up is on wages, and that's the reason why the wages are so very low. Given the challenge on the Sunshine Coast, I'm interested that there was very little in the report about in-home daycares. There are 5 of them in my area. I have heard from operators of in-home daycares that it is getting harder and harder to operate. And it seems to me that if we're going to try and find spaces quickly, and lots of spaces, we have lots of homes. So why would that not be a strategic objective?
Thank you for that question. In-home daycares are, if they're supporting children, there are two, well, you'll know this, but there are 2 sort of licensings for that. And both of the ones that offer for 7 children or for up to 8 children are licensed. So their numbers were included in the report. They are included in the report. We didn't separate them out. And when we talk about licensed daycare, we are talking about group facilities as well as home-based facilities. We didn't separate that out. I think in terms of the more rural areas of the Sunshine Coast and in addressing the issues of transportation, having daycare near people where they live and where they work, the home-based is really, really important. And we didn't mean to say that that's not supported in the report.
Okay. Director Hiltz?
Thanks. Yeah, lots of data in there, and it's the quality phrase. I also understand that's kind of also expressed as safety. Safety is the number one, and that relates to quality. So that there's the assumption that a licensed facility is safer than an unlicensed. Is that an assumption that's in the field?
Yes, to answer your question, a licensed facility requires a lot of safety measures. So, for instance, if you have a home-based licensed childcare, you have to ensure that your bookcases and anything on the wall that could be pulled down is safely secured. So there are a lot of requirements for that. And the safety issues are very important, and it's also, unfortunately, a deterrent for some people to do that, then have their childcare in their home, because they do have to make modifications. But safety is a key for that, and that's within the licensing.
All right. Anybody else have any questions for our presenter? No? Oh, Alternate Director Howard. Welcome to the party.
Thank you. Finally figured out how to make my microphone work. Thank you for the presentation and the report. I just wanted to better understand the purpose and function of the Joint Child Care Council. It strikes me from reviewing the report and your presentation that all of the levers that need to be moved to change the funding and the support and the capacity lie at the provincial level. And the staff report tends to point that out and say that the local government role is a supportive one, and perhaps there's a role that can be played with respect to zoning and matters, but the actual work to increase licensed daycare spaces is fundamentally a provincial matter. So what would the purpose of a local government-based Joint Child Care Council be? What would its work be? I'm just trying to get a sense before we endorse a council and potentially direct that time be invested in it, how it would serve to advance the objectives of the child care plan and things like that.
Great, thank you for that question. That also came up through the steering committee, what would the function be? And the idea behind having that oversight, they're really an oversight body, is really to keep childcare front and center, and to have a committee that would then be tracking the numbers, be seeing the improvement, and to continue to be that voice of advocacy for the community, and to look for opportunities where childcare can be supported. Are there zoning elements that do prohibit childcare? There shouldn't be. That's not one of the things that's generally restricted in zoning, but if there are elements to that, that's a place for the different governments and the different community organizations to come together and talk about that. And one of the things that came up a lot throughout the discussion was the role of local businesses. And the Joint Child Care Committee would also have a representation or more from local businesses, and that's a way also to get the discussion going, to keep it alive between the partnership between what local governments can do, how businesses can do that. Childcare is really an economic development issue, and that was part of what the incentive is to creating the committee. So the people who spoke about from the steering committee, they really talked about meeting quarterly or twice a year, and it's really the idea of having an oversight body. And if you don't, generally what we look at in planning is if you don't track the numbers, if you don't keep an eye on things, they sort of fall off the table, and we don't want to see that childcare sort of loses its prominence.
Okay. I actually had one question. You mentioned the economic development aspect of things, and I may have missed it in going through the report, but did Scredo participate, our regional economic development organization?
No, they did not.
Okay.
There was a representative from the trust, the local Sunshine Coast Trust Credit Union, sorry.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Director Hills.
Sure, I'm going to follow up on the committee. So in order to get grant and access to funding, the province and the federal government seem to want to make sure that there's a plan in place. They don't want to just put money where there's no plan. So this committee is to kind of organize this organization around childcare on the coast and sort of present kind of more of a unified picture so that the province can see that there is a plan here rather than just people running in 100 different directions. Is that kind of one of the roles of the council?
Thank you. Yes, that's a great way to put it. That would be one of the roles of the council.
All right. Thank you very much for your presentation. Moving on to Annex A, item number 3, report from the Planning Department regarding the Sunshine Coast Child Care Action Plan. Did staff want to speak to this at all?
Thank you. Staff would like to thank Maria and her team and the steering committee for their work to create this action plan. The report quantifies and underscores the clear need on the Sunshine Coast for quality, accessible, and affordable childcare. Staff recommend becoming a member of the Joint Child Care Council as it transitions from the current steering committee. And further, staff recommend that the SCRD be a signatory to a letter from Sunshine Coast local governments to the Ministry of Children and Family Development advocating for the implementation of universal childcare. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions? Director McMahon?
Well, of course, I'm not against childcare. I have a problem with the targets in this report because there is no, as far as I can see, there's no possibility of hitting the targets. I mean, the barriers are very well identified, especially the lack of workers. And I have a hard time adopting targets that we have. There's no plan. Like, there's no suggestion for how we would ever get there. There's a short-term identification of some new spaces coming out, which is great. But I'm not. I mean, it's sort of like wishing for daycare spaces to fall from heaven. So I have trouble with it.
Director Hiltz.
I follow that as well. They're aspirational targets. So what is the difference about how? What is the significance of the targets to the broader presentation of childcare on the coast? I guess is.
Whoever wants to take that on, Julie.
Thank you for the question. I may ask Maria to chime in here as well. My understanding is that they are aspirational targets. They are meant to correspond to the need that's been underscored in the plan and meant to be a driver of advocacy action.
Thank you. Alternate Director Rowe, also welcome to the party.
Thank you. A question, would it be safe to say that this is what we could call an evidence-based document as far as the need goes?
Yes, it's got as its foundation, I would call it a needs assessment and then a plan into implementation. In terms of the targets, they are aspirational, but it is also within a framework of 10 years and in a framework of universal childcare. So the goal is ultimately that those targets would be met in a universal childcare system. So it's really looking at what is lacking here and what needs to be put in place.
Right. So I actually don't have an issue with the targets, no matter what they say, so long as it's based on an actual needs assessment, which it is. And I think it's a great document. It gives us something to carry with us at UBCM, which we didn't have before. So for me, the numbers could be 2,000 if that's what the need showed, so long as it's based on a thorough assessment, which I think that it is. So although I hear Director McMahon's concerns, I don't actually mirror those. Thank you.
All right, Director McMahon.
I suppose it's semantics, but if we said that that's what our need is, that if we had that many childcare spaces, we'd have enough, I'd be somewhat more comfortable with that. If that was expressed as what you think the actual need is on the Sunshine Coast, because obviously not everybody is going to use childcare services. So there must be a ratio of the population who would use the spaces if they were available.
Thank you. That was researched and discussed as well through this process. And it is not, we're not actually recommending that every child have a space in childcare, because not every parent will need that. They'll be from 0 to maybe 18 months, those children have a parent who is able to have parental leave, that sort of thing. So we actually put it proportionately. So we have, for children from 0 to 5 years old, 70% of that population would have access to childcare. And that's based on what we looked at across Canada, across Europe as well. They found that in an ideal system, only 70% of uptake from 0 to 5. And then for before and after school care, we looked at 60% of the children.
All right, thank you. Director Howard, alternate Director Howard.
I find myself speaking more frequently than I thought I would. This question is directed to Julie, and it's simply to clarify, in my mind, what steps this board is being asked to take. As I read the conclusion in the staff report, recommending endorsement of the child care targets, and I don't know if that's intended to be by way of resolution of this board or simply by way of receipt of the report that is included in our package, but I would appreciate clarity around that. And then become a signatory to a letter to the Ministry of Child and Family Development. I would appreciate knowing who will be writing that letter, and because I noted some discussion as to whether endorsing the high and aspirational targets is something that some directors here are comfortable doing. I'm wondering whether that needs to be in the content of that letter, or whether that letter is rather more just an endorsement of moving towards universal child care. So I'd like to know more about who writes it, and does it come back here? And then the Child Care Council, somebody's got to convene the thing, presumably. Somebody's got to move it forward, prepare agendas, et cetera, and it would also be helpful to know whether that is a role that would ultimately fall to SCRD staff, for example, as lead umbrella local government in the region.
Go ahead.
Thank you for those 3 questions. I'll do my best to address them in the order that they arrived. There is a recommendation, second recommendation in the report that requests that the targets be approved. And the intention behind that recommendation, which is the same for each of the District of Sechelt and for the town of Gibsons, is an expression of unity across local governments to underscore the need. And that, yes, I believe the intention is to include that endorsement or approval in the letter that be written to Minister of Children and Family Development. My understanding, based on a resolution coming from the District of Sechelt several weeks ago, is that the District of Sechelt staff have begun working on that letter and are requesting signatory of the other local governments as well. So I expect that's something we would see at a future meeting. And then the third question around convening of the Joint Child Care Council. The District of Sechelt has been the convener to date of the steering committee. And my understanding of the meeting 2 weeks ago, where support was expressed by the District of Sechelt Council, is that that role would be continued from District of Sechelt staff as the convener.
All right. That answers your questions. Perfect. Director McMahon, sorry.
Well, we're obviously happy that the District of Sechelt has taken this on, because somebody has to lead the parade. I would like to strongly urge that the newly forming council identify barriers to home-based small child cares in the rural areas, because they are struggling. They need help. They're very important. They're in the neighborhoods where people live. And I think we should do anything that lies within our powers to assist them.
Certainly, neighborhood child cares make a lot of sense because they're walkable. You don't have to drive to them. You're going to know your neighbors, that sort of thing, for sure. Director Hiltz, you reaching for the microphone there? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
I was avoiding a scratch as well. So. This isn't the only plan that's going on in BC. So I'm going UBC, the province gives money to UBCM, UBCM moves out the grant funding, all this data will somewhere be collated somewhere. So how does this data ultimately, the province wants these numbers for their plan, and they're saying that this is good data, we'll accept the good data, we'll stick it into our plan. So all these aspirational numbers will come together. What's the mechanism that is collecting all those aspirational numbers of these plans? Is that known?
Yes, with the funding came a spreadsheet from UBCM, and they have it set up so that all the data is broken down into the formats that they want, the short-term, long-term, medium-term targets, what kind of childcare. And we've completed that spreadsheet, and it will be part of the final report that goes back to UBCM, which then goes back to the province.
All right. Thank you. We do have some recommendations here on the page. Director Pratt?
I'd like to move the recommendations that we have on page 1 of our agenda package.
All right. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded. Any further comments, discussion? All those in favor? All right. That's carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex B, item 4. Development Variance Permit Application DVP 00047. Do staff wish to speak to this?
Yes, thank you. So this application is for a variance to the requested the exterior side parcel line setback from 4.5 meters to 0.466 meters to permit the construction of a new single-family dwelling, including the extent of the roof. So the variance would permit the proposed dwelling to be constructed closer to the side parcel line on the east side of the parcel, which is adjacent to an unconstructed but dedicated public road access to Saginaw Lake. So support for the proposed variance would not impact the ability to develop the adjacent road dedication for public access to the lake in the future, or have any adverse impact on the ability to increase public access to the waterfront of the lake through development of the road right-of-way. Staff noted a typo error in the application intent on page 153 of the report, and the variance amount should be 4.034 meter instead of 3 meters. So staff recommend issuing the variance. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments, discussion? Director Lee?
I did talk to our chair of the APC, and based on the new information they got for the setbacks and for the reason for being closer to the right-of-way, they were comfortable that the staff recommendations were good for them now. So.
Okay. And looking at how close this is to the road allowance, I had some concerns, but then, in thinking it through, you go, it's never going to be a highway that leads to the lake. So unless we're building a bridge across the lake, that's not going to be a high-traffic area. Did anybody else have anything they want to say, add? Director Hiltz?
My understanding is that a variance is there as a last resort. So is there a requirement to have a house at 20.25 meters wide? Is that a requirement on this parcel of land? Is the width of the house a requirement?
I would suspect no, but I'll let staff answer the question with certainty.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. There's no requirement for that width. Thank you.
Follow-up?
So the follow-up is, what is it about this parcel of land that, as I note on the western side, there's another 1.8 meters. The setback of the current property is at 3.26 meters, I believe. So the side yard setback is 1.5. So there's an additional 1.5 on the western side. So is there a topographical consideration that the property, the building cannot be shifted? And I guess I'm wondering what exploration was to avoid the variance, which is supposed to be a last resort. So what other steps have been taken to avoid this as a last resort?
Was there any consideration given to an adjustment in the footprint or the shape of the structure?
Thank you for the question. The applicant has not given any consideration to shift the house toward the west side. Thank you.
Okay. And I believe we do have the applicant here. Yes. Do we want to let them answer that question? Or?
Sure, if he wants to.
Yeah. Come on up to the mic and if you wanted to speak to that, you can. Oh, yeah, just state your name for the record.
Pat Bickerton, property owner for the variance application 47. Part of the reasoning when we were designing the house to have it sited at the 1.5 standard side yard setback on the road right away is because the property on the other side is quite higher in elevation with an existing house. So they're up here, we're down here. We keep bringing in closer. We have to. The closer we move it to the opposite side, we run into not unsurmountable site concerns, but we do have to do a fair bit more of retaining walls and different things like that as we get closer to the other property. So that's part of the reasoning in our application to treat the road right-of-way as a standard side yard setback, knowing that what we're building won't impact any future lake access if it needed to be built. So that's why we're going to the 1.5, and then obviously the roof overhang gets to that point, 466.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions? We do have recommendations here if there are no other questions.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the recommendations on page 153.
All right. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded. Any other final comments? Director Hiltz?
Based on the evidence I have, I'm not going to be supporting it. I would like to support it, but I didn't see much evidence about working on another alternative, and the building isn't actually 1.5 meters back because of the overhang. And I look at the other parcels in the neighborhood, and they are 1.5 meter setback. And one of the things that really struck me was 2 nights ago we had the wildfire presentation of FireSmart, and the accessibility of the 1.5 meter combustible zone around a house is a very important critical area in terms of fire smarting. So I think it almost, if there's a fence on the eastern side, the ability of this property to be fire smarted as based on the recommendations would be limited. So I think that's another reason about the 1.5 meter full setback rather than the way it is presented. So that's just recent information. Whether the fire department is looking at the fire smarting of properties for the greater good of the community. Fire smarting is the first protection of your own dwelling, not the forest. It's protect your own building, first of all. And this 1.5 meter non-combustible area around the perimeter of the building is a very important area. So I'm not going to be supporting it because of that.
Director Lee?
Staff can probably confirm this, but my understanding is the 1.5 is to the foundation, which all houses are built to on that. And the problem that you're seeing with the 0.46, or it's actually 4.6, is that the road right-of-way uses a different point. So if this was not against a public highway, it would be 1.5 and not 4.6. So I think I have that right.
That it's the MODI requirements that require the setback here for 0.466?
Yes, MOTI has issued a permit permitting the setback from measuring from the roof eave to the road at 0.46. But the foundation will be set back at 1.5 meters.
All right. Thank you very much. Oh, Director Lee?
And the 1.5 meters is the actual SCRD standard setback. Is that correct? If it was a normal property line and not a highway.
If that property line is not adjacent to the highway, is 1.5. But if the property line is adjacent to a highway, then the setback will be 4.5 meters.
Okay. All right. And this is rural voting only. Any last comments, questions? No? All those in favor? Opposed? Would you like that recorded? Yes? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Moving on to Annex C. Lease renewal for Half Moon Bay Dock. Would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Chair Toth. SCRD maintains leases from the province for the areas of land and water covered by SCRD ports. And so this report requests authorization for delegated authorities to enter into a lease renewal for the Half Moon Bay dock for a period of 5 years. And staff would be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right. This is, when we get to the voting, it's B, D, E, and F. Sorry, Pender Harbor, you can't vote on this one. Director McMahon?
I'm just curious how the lease came to expire. Did the ministry fail to contact us about the expiration?
Thank you for the question. The province's timelines for land authorizations and lease documents are not not as timely as staff might expect, and so sometimes these things do lag some time, and there's back and forth even in getting the final signed copy back from the province once these are authorized. But staff maintain good communications with the ministry, and they're aware of where we're at in the process. Thank you.
I've got a quick question, just skimming through this again. 5 years. That's not necessarily an issue with the province. That's our current best practices.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff feel that because there are changes to things like accounting standards relating to asset retirement, environmental regulations, and there are ongoing conversations about the sustainability and potential community partnerships and changes to our ports, that a 5-year term provides some efficiency in terms of managing the amount of paperwork associated with this, while giving us the flexibility should the regional district desire to go a different direction or to investigate a change to lease terms or something like that from the standard provincial lease. We have that flexibility in the not too distant future. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on the flexibility. So if it was a 10-year lease, can a leaseholder change conditions of the lease or withdraw from that lease? Is there a penalty to do that, or is it like if you just say, I don't want to do it, can you get out of it?
Go ahead.
Thank you for the question. The standard provincial lease does not include a clause that provides the ability for a leaseholder to withdraw. Staff haven't investigated that specific question and could do so, but the framing of the lease is that responsibility is being transferred for a fixed period of time, and there's an apparent expectation that the leaseholder will maintain the lease for that period.
Thank you. Director Kroll, you look like you want to jump in.
The town of Gibsons currently has a lease, which is a 20-year lease. It has 2 years left on it, and the town has the option to relinquish it if they so desire without penalty, and someone else could apply for it. So
that's the water lot lease. Yeah, I don't know if I wouldn't know if there's a difference between water lot leases and the dock structures and things like that. It's not sure offhand.
No, staff are not sure.
Okay.
This is also a water lot lease. Staff would note that the standard terms of the provincial lease have changed over time. Thank you.
Okay. Director McMahon. Okay, Director Pratt.
Thank you. This is a great asset for the community. However, as with any asset, I always am concerned about the long-term management and any cost of repairs. And the last time I visited the dock, it seems to be in very good condition. And I'm happy to move and extend for the 5 years as per staff recommendation. But just as a cautionary, as with all of our docs, and as we're finding, Director Hiltz and I were at the Ports Monitoring Committee earlier this week, and it's, there's concern because these are, they become expensive assets that we've taken on as they've been divested from other governments. So those are my comments, and when we get to it, I'm happy to move these recommendations.
I think Director McMahon is seconding your comment, your recommendation.
Then I will move the recommendations.
Perfect. Seconded. Did you also want to speak? No? Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in here before I... No? All in favor? All right, that's carried. Thank you very much. Is there anything from any of the APC minutes, Annex D, E, F, G, and H, that anybody would like to address, flag, bring attention to? Director McMahon.
I just, at some future meeting, would be interested in having a conversation about the APCs. The new members on ours have not yet had training, and there's been some lack of clarity about the expectations of some of the referrals. And so I'm feeling as though perhaps our APCs could use a little support. It's difficult as the director sitting at the APC because I'm supposed to be taking advice. I'm not supposed to be leading the conversation. But there has been some confusion over why some of the referrals were going to the APCs, and the committee members typically were not aware of the issues that had been raised before, particularly around things like the rural dynamic zone or the invasive species. So if we're going to have a high-quality conversation and some useful advice, I think that we may need to provide a little more support.
Perhaps even some orientation and things of that nature?
There was an orientation session for new members last year, and it was a good one. It probably couldn't hurt some of the members to do a refresher, but they also don't meet all that frequently. The most number of meetings you'd have in a year would be 10, and there are some months that there's no referral. So I'd say that probably 8 meetings might be more typical. But any observations from staff on this subject would be very welcome.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Staff appreciate the director's comments and have on our work plan an APC refresher. For members, we also have some new recording secretaries, and so ensuring support to those valued members of our team is also part of that plan. Thank you.
And I know that at the District of Sechelt, we're recruiting a bunch of new members for our APC. I don't know if the town of Gibson's, are you also recruiting? And I know that the municipal APCs have different issues than the rural ones do, but I wonder if there's any opportunities to collaborate and try and share some of that across governments. Director Pratt and Director Lee.
Regarding the orientation piece, I attended the new member orientation last year, and as a director, I found it very valuable and would like to suggest to staff that directors be invited again to the orientation. It just helps us to hear the same information that the APC members are hearing.
Director Lee.
Thank you. After that last orientation, which I attended as well, several members of the APC commented on how valuable it was to them, and that included longer-serving members of the APC as well, so I guess people can use refreshers. On the other issue, though, of support for our APC, I think there should be an opportunity for them to request some presentations on some of the more complex issues put before them, because they try to make decisions based on what's in the report when they need the same thing we need, a little bit of explanation as well. So there should be some way that they can request staff to attend on some of those issues. I know the problem is that the agenda goes out in short notice, and then you'd have to arrange staff on short notice, but there should be some kind of a solution to that.
And I guess from my own ignorance of the rural APCs, because with the municipalities, our staff do attend the APCs. Do regional district staff ever attend to provide supplemental information that may not be in a report but might be pertinent?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, staff do sometimes proactively plan to attend to support more complex reports, and staff are receptive to requests to attend. If that's not widely known or appreciated by our APC chairs, maybe that should be covered in this refresher orientation, because indeed staff are prepared to support these important groups of volunteers.
All right. Director Hiltz had his hand up first.
Yeah, on this topic of APC, I just clarifying that APCs are under the advisory planning bylaw, the 453. There's no separate terms of reference in other place, so anything about APC is in that bylaw. Just verification.
Staff weren't anticipating that question, so can't answer with absolute confidence. But at the table here, we believe that there are terms of reference that support our APCs. Thanks.
Okay, Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm just going to suggest a topic for the upcoming orientation, and that is private roads. We had a lengthy discussion about that at our APC because a development application came to us with a private road, and a whole lot of questions were raised, like, does it have to meet MODI standards? Do the ambulances and fire trucks have to use this road, or can they refuse service on a private road? And a whole lot of other, questions arose, and we were really struggling because people weren't very clear about it. And I know there are quite a few private roads, particularly, I believe, in Area D, and a lot of people who buy properties that are on private roads are not aware that they are private roads, and they are not aware of the maintenance issues or the lack of things like garbage pickup. So it would be helpful to know. Thanks.
All right. Anything else that anybody wants to bring up regarding APCs before we move on? Director Pratt.
Just in particular to the Area B APC meeting, note on recommendation number 2, the Half Moon Bay APC recommendation about the dynamic rural zone being part of the regional growth strategy when we get to those conversations, when they happen. They're quite intrigued by integrating the rural dynamic zone into a larger regional growth strategy.
Okay. Moving on, anything out of the Agricultural Advisory Committee? I should have included it at the same time, but I missed it, so. No? All right. We do have 2 items for communications. Start with Annex J, I guess. I understand we may have...
Can I just make a suggestion? Can we maybe speak about number 13 on the agenda first, because we're hopeful that there may be an update shortly after
Sure.
Regarding number 12. Sorry, I've been madly messaging with the CAO, but there might be an update for number 12 in a few minutes. So if we could speak about number 13 first, please.
Okay. Director McMahon.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about District Lot 1313. Just for those who may not know the background of this lot, in the 1940s, it was declared a watershed reserve for Gibsons, and it was on the books as a watershed reserve up until the early 2000s, when the province changed the legislation around that, removing protection from watershed reserves. It was not in the BC Timber Sales operating area, timber supply area, in 2010. But Sometime between 2010 and 2013, BCTS redrew the boundaries of their timber supply area to include Block 1313, and it turned up in their 2013 operating plan that they were going to log it, and the residents were exercised. The residents have been concerned about this block since the late 90s. There's been a lot of, correspondence and so forth. The residents the residents are working on a plan. They would like the block to be withdrawn from the timber harvesting area, and that it be made into an educational forest, which is what they are working towards right now. In the last few weeks, BC Timber Sales has been in touch with individual homeowners adjacent to the west side of the block. They dropped off letters on people's doorsteps inviting them to meetings, and those meetings have taken place, 4 at least that I'm aware of, plus a meeting with the Trail Society. But to my knowledge, we aren't aware of what their consultation plan is. Their public consultation has started, but I do not believe they have been in touch with the SCRD to tell us what this consultation will consist of. So I have a whole series of questions, and I'm going to move that we write to BC Timber Sales asking them for clarification about their public consultation on this area. And I have a bunch of clarifying questions.
Go ahead.
I have a question for staff, because we do have previous direction from the board on this item, and we had a draft consultation plan and everything. And so I would like to hear from staff where we are in that process, and if there's what consultation has come back from BCTS based on the direction that we received from the ministry.
Thank you for the question. The draft SCRD staff on board direction drafted some recommendations for BCTS to use in their enhanced consultation around District Lot 1313. The board received that report in May 2019. The intention behind the report and using SCRD internal engagement planning tool was both to share some suggestions with BCTS as well as share our planning tool as an example. So that was provided to BCTS in Q4, along with comments from advisory committees. As you will remember, that report was referred out to advisory committees. Staff collected considerable feedback from advisory committees and passed that to BCTS as well. Staff were recently notified that immediately adjacent neighbors were receiving a letter, and that is the extent of what staff know about the consultation process.
Okay.
If I'm remembering correctly, and I'm sorry, I should have pulled out the letter from Minister Donaldson before this meeting, and just because I remember the letter was pretty clear that it was very explicit that BCTS have that a very good consultation process, or a better, some kind of consultation process. And so I'm very disappointed to hear that they haven't reached out to us. We've been very proactive on our side, and it sounds like BCTS has been fairly quiet on theirs. And I'm going to look to the other directors for confirmation on that. I can pull up the letter, but also to staff. I'm remembering the letter as being fairly explicit from the ministry to us, because it was regarding the two parcels, the one at Clack Creek as well as DL 1313, and BCTS was asked to hold the cut block or that it was going to be held until there was further community consultation. So it feels a bit disappointing. That's all so I don't know if staff can comment on that.
Thank you for the comment and the question. I guess staff's perspective would be that we just don't know. We don't know what BC Timber Sales has planned. They haven't shared that with us, and by requesting more information, perhaps what reads as disappointment will be addressed.
Okay. Back to Director McMahon. You said you had questions, as well as you do. You did put a motion out there. I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity before we move forward.
I move that we write a letter to BC Timber Sales asking them for more clarification on their public consultation process regarding Block 1313.
Okay. Is it seconded?
I got a comment there.
You going to second it first?
Sure.
Okay, seconded. Go ahead, Director Lee.
This is kind of a question to staff, and that is, I thought I was expecting them to come and present the plan in person to us. Has that been a past practice, or that is not something they routinely do?
Thank you for the question. Staff would like some clarification on which plan you were referring to.
Early last year, when they came in, they did, was it a webinar, I think, they give on the plan itself, the 5-year plan?
The operating plan?
Yeah.
Thank you. It is a common practice between staff at BCTS and staff at SCRD to have a staff-to-staff meeting when the operations plan is released. It has not been my experience that there's been a presentation to the board on the operations plan.
It probably was done as part of our acclimatization. I'll have to look back to see what presentation it was. But I was wondering if we should actually, considering the importance of this, ask for a meeting like that so we could have an interactive discussion.
Director Pratt.
Oh, sorry. I keep on forgetting to turn off my mic, but I'd like to speak. So I pulled up the letter from March 29th regarding the Reed Road Timber Service, or TSL. And Minister Donaldson's letter is very explicit he references the land use planning so that it will influence management of the effort, but that BCTS will continue to work with the SCRD to address these values to the extent possible, and will hold off advertising the sale until the discussions have occurred in a meaningful and balanced managed approach that has been in a meaning and balanced approach. And that BCTS would shift development to other timber sale licenses that are largely outside the current proposed park expansion for Mount Elphinstone. So we have clear direction from the minister, and so it's disappointing from the BCTS side that we don't have that conversation coming back to us.
Director Hiltz.
Yeah, on that theme of the consult and there's the intent to get the feedback, and then there's to inform the people who you got the feedback about what their feedback actually changed. So maybe there's just kind of a misalignment of what Donaldson's saying in BCTS, so maybe they could just align what they're trying to say as a way to frame it.
Alternate Director Howard.
Thank you. I had been trying to dig up the same letter, so I appreciate you bringing it up. I support the initiative to write the letter. This doesn't need to be reflected in an amendment to the motion or anything, but I think that the content of the letter can go further than seeking clarity. I think the content of the letter should remind BCTS of the commitments made by the minister in his letter to the board, and could state that thus far we are not satisfied that those commitments are being fulfilled based on the information that we have been provided by BCTS, and that we would like further information from BCTS to inform us so that we can ensure that the commitments made by the minister are being fulfilled. So in general, I'm proposing a stronger tone to the letter.
Okay. Thumbs up from Director McMahon right on. Director McMahon, you said you had a list of...
I do indeed. The first thing is that the area of, I believe it's called the Area of Enhanced Public Consultation around Block 1313 has been expanded from the block, so it's been expanded north and west into Area D. Welcome to the party, Area D. So my first question was, why have they expanded the cut block area in the 2020 plan? The next question was, what is the consultation process they have planned, and what are the timelines around it? The next question is, who have they defined as the stakeholders, and why? A question from the residents is, does BC Timber Sales or the logging company take long-term legal responsibility for flooding on downstream properties resulting from logging activities? If not, what is the residents' legal recourse? Got three more. I can hear her typing madly.
Yeah, she's typing. I see Ian writing furiously, so hopefully some notes are getting taken here.
Do they plan to do up-to-date mapping of creeks and drainages on the property and downstream from Block 1313 in residential areas? Has the Squamish Nation provided anything in writing about Block 1313? And finally, what assurance do residents have that the land won't be sold and rezoned for development after logging, as was the case with Block 1312?
All right. Those are today's questions? All right. Staff writing furiously. I doubt, do staff have answers or even partial answers to any of those questions, or is that purely going to have to go to BCTS?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff think those questions are best directed to BCTS.
Okay. Director Lee?
My memory's old and a little bit foggy, but yes, we did. It was we had a webinar, North Island Sunshine Coast Forestry webinar, and we talked about forest tenures in BC, and that was back in January 2019. And so I've confused the two items. Thanks.
All right.
It was a good webinar, though.
Director Hiltz?
Where are we on this topic? We got a motion on the floor. I'm just a little. We got a motion, and we're just kind of filling in some gaps around firming up the motion. Is that where we're going?
I think so. Do you want to hear the motion read? Yes? All right.
So what I have for the motion is that the SRD contact BCTS to request clarification on their public consultation process regarding Block DL 1313. I've taken some other notes about discussion. Another one was about requesting a meeting with BCTS to discuss the 2020-2024 operational plan. And then I've noted some questions that Dr. McMahon has just spoken out. So I could read those if that's required.
Director McMahon.
Well, I actually like what Alternate Director Howard said in terms of the wording of the motion. I thought that was quite helpful to ask, or I'm going to throw it back to Alternate Director Howard.
Well,
Stronger language. He had it really well.
But also identifying that disconnect between what the minister had said and what BCTS is saying.
I wrote a note just to say that within the letter, there should maybe be the quotation from Minister Donaldson's letter, just to remind about the commitment that the minister made for further information regarding the consultation plan, and just insert that into the letter and use stronger language.
Director Pratt.
One of the items that's consistently mentioned throughout Minister Donald's letter of March 29th, 2019, it's been almost a year, is regarding modernized land use planning and that process with the Shuswap Nation. And there's a disconnect as this area is also, it's as Director McMahon referenced, it's within Squamish territory. And it goes into Shuswap territory as well, but that needs to be referenced in the letter to BCTS as well. But there's some gaps.
Director Kroll.
I was just going to suggest that the letter to the minister should also be copied to Amanda Gerard, because past experience would indicate that a lot of times people operate in silos, and the left hand and the right hand. So you might write to the minister, and in the meantime, Amanda Gerard carries on with her own agenda.
Director McMahon.
Actually, the motion was to write to BC Timber Sales, but yes, we should CC the ministry, FLNRO, and
Director Pratt.
So Minister Donaldson's original letter that went to us in BCTS also went to Minister Heyman, MLA Simons, as well as Ellen Johnsrud, who's with FLNRO, Stacey Gould with BCTS, and Torianne Minen of FLNRO as well. So we've got all those PC'd in the Donaldson letter. So I would suggest that it goes to everybody that it originally went to.
Alternate Director Howard.
I'm sorry to be weighing in late on a new comment on this discussion, because it's a great discussion. The recent washout on Lower Road is very much on the minds of Area D residents, and I'm not going to suggest that we have enough information to directly relate that washout to loss of uphill forest cover, because I don't think we can make that direct linkage. But I know, speaking for Area D, that there is a heightened sensitivity of the connection between hydrology within our community areas and removal of forest cover. And I guess I would just raise it that if that can be woven into the letter, I think that would reflect the interests of Area D residents.
Okay. Director McMahon.
I was, in fact, going to suggest a second letter covering the first letter. My intent was to get right down to the nuts and bolts of the process about 1313 through as BC Timber Sales sees it. But there are a number of broader issues that are raised by this property and the way it's being handled, and I have a list, and would be happy to suggest a letter to FLNRO and with CCs all over the place.
As a second separate motion, keeping the first one to BCTS and applicable parties around primarily consultation and engagement, right? Okay. Any other questions, comments about this letter? No? Okay. Everybody's understanding what we're... Yeah? Okay. All those in favor? All right. Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah. There are a number of issues with this property. The first one that strikes me is the lack of senior government leadership on issues related to climate change. As Director Howard pointed out, we are having more and frequent and more severe rainstorms, and we're having washouts. And people are very concerned, and local government wants to do our very best to protect our infrastructure and our citizens, but we're hampered by lack of authority and by senior government ministers who are ministries that are operating on a business as usual basis and are working in silos without any coordination or collaboration. So resolving our stormwater management issues requires collaboration between FLNRO, MOTI, and I would think the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. The community interface, this property is a buffer zone between residential and industrial uses. And we're working towards a regional growth strategy, which is clearly going to talk about buffer zones. So it's important that we have some control over this. Overland flooding, there are severe existing problems on private and public properties in this area. There was the washout on Lower Road. There was a washout last winter on Russell Road, and Chaster Creek Ravine is seeing a lot of landslides, some of them associated with increasingly flashy flood events in the creeks and streams. There is an issue with water. Block 1313 was for a long time a community watershed reserve. Many of the properties below it are on wells, and property owners on properties below Block 1312 were impacted by the clear cutting. The block is on the edge of the Gibson's Aquifer recharge area, and the SCRD is in fact planning to drill test wells in this area in Block 1312 and in the Wood Creek Park area, which is below 1313. Another of the issues is ecosystem resilience. This is one of the very few undisturbed sections of forest remaining on the Lower Sunshine Coast. It has never been logged. It was burned at one point and repopulated, but it was repopulated with native species with local DNA, not replanted. So it presents an almost unique opportunity to study the local ecosystem and effects of climate change. And finally, there's the issue of carbon capture, which is back to the lack of climate leadership on the part of senior government. There's a lot of scientific evidence piling up that mature forests are key to carbon capture and that logging has GHG impacts exceeding that of BC's entire transportation sector. So it makes no sense from every point of view to log this block of land. And I think we should remind the senior ministries that we are struggling with these issues and they are not helping us.
All right. That's quite the weighty letter to go off. Would anybody else like to weigh in on that? Staff would like to weigh in on that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a process comment, in case it's helpful to the committee, the letter that's included on the agenda today was the notice of the release of the operating plan for BCTS, and staff have included it here to have information shared in a timely way, but are working on a staff report that will analyze the contents of the operating plan and also will include comments from referrals to our advisory groups. And that's expected on the April agenda before the province's deadline for comments on the operating plan. And some of the issues that were referenced in the director's comments are not specific to just DL 1313. And on the basis of the work that's been done to review the operating plan so far and the analysis that's been done on past operating plans, staff expect that analysis of some of those issues would be included in that forthcoming report. Thank you.
Okay. Director McMahon, are we happy to wait until April, perhaps, to see what the staff report's got?
Yes, I would be happy to wait until April on that one.
Okay. All right. Anything else anybody wants to bring up on Annex K? Delaying as long as we can to go back to... we're good? He's good? Getting a nod? Okay. Then back to Annex J. Over to the CAO, because apparently he's got an update for us.
Thank you, Chair. staff have been reaching out to both the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure and to Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development this week to have some discussions around some confusion around these two separate but concurrent processes that are ongoing. One, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure project around dual language highway signs, and the second with Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations looking for input on potential name changes for Wilson Creek and Madeira Park. I was on the phone just a few minutes ago and been sharing emails with Jennifer Goad, who has one of the longer job titles in the province. And Jennifer is the Executive Director, Mountain Resorts and Heritage, Integrated Resource Operations Division, Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. Now, in explaining some of the confusion that's occurring over here, Jennifer wanted to make an offer proactively to make a presentation to the board at an upcoming meeting, and in that to explain the difference in process between the dual language highway signs and what is a far more robust process around the potential name changes. They'll talk about that process. They can talk about opportunities for input, how that input is considered, and how that filters through what is a longer process that considers many things, including public input on the name changes themselves. They are quite separate processes, but she can understand why there's confusion and totally understands that there is confusion, and would really like an opportunity to help shed some light on these different processes and how they work.
Great. Thank you for that update. That is great news. Directors, do you have anything? Director Lee.
Thank you. That is good news. I've just received late last night a letter from our advisory committee and our chamber expressing concern over lack of consultation and input into the planning process, and also wishing that it was clearer and we could celebrate the fact it was happening and all agree that it was the right thing to do. And so this, I think, will go a long way. So I'm happy that you were successful in your mission. Thank you.
All right. Alternate Director Howard.
Thank you for the update. I have a comment and a question, and I'm not sure who is positioned to answer the question. The question is, how would the scheduling of that information session relate to the stated April 23rd, 2020 deadline in the letter received from the provincial toponymist, which is the first time I was aware there was such a position as a toponymist. So that's the question. And then the comment is, I personally don't feel that I need a presentation on it because I'm aware of the distinct roles that the two bodies play. But the public reaction is to both aspects. And if there's a presentation which is restricted only to the geographic Services of BC renaming process without addressing the MOTI piece, I think the public concerns will not be addressed in full. So I'm wondering if there's any manner in which MOTI can be brought in to the picture. The representative that you have been dealing with won't be able to speak on behalf of MOTI, is my understanding. So that's, I guess, a second question as well to you.
Thank you for the questions. I'll be regrouping with Jennifer later today by phone to talk about scheduling. Certainly the indications I was giving to Jennifer this morning by email was it would be nice if there was a possibility to have a presentation potentially for the March 26th meeting of the board, but there's probably other meetings that could be a candidate for a presentation depending on their scheduling and availability. And staff could also certainly reach out to Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to see if there's someone from that ministry that would be able to do an update on the dual language signage. I do think from my conversation with Jennifer this morning that they would be able to shed some pretty clear distinction on how those separate processes work. And certainly it has been expressed to both the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure and to Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations that there's a strong feeling of being under-communicated with on both of these separate but concurrent processes.
All right. Director Pratt, I thought I saw your hand up.
Just a question, if the CAO needs a committee or a motion from the committee to follow up on those items.
I don't think it's necessary. I'm happy to have staff coordinate with the province on their offer to come and do a presentation.
Director Hiltz?
Yeah, I was following up on the timeline of Flynn Road is looking for our advice and comments by the 23rd. Are we going to postpone that until the presentation, or are we going to have comments before then? It was the timing issue that Director Howard was also looking at. So about they're asking for advice and comments. So which comes first, the presentation and then the advice and comments, or do we have advice and comments at this point?
Go ahead.
I was just going to mention that the April 23rd deadline isn't a hard deadline as well. The province recognizes that based on the level of interest or comments and feedback that are received, it could easily end up being extended.
Okay. So I think the answer to that was wait for the presentation, then provide feedback. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I look forward to more information because when I read the letter, it wasn't completely clear to me that the deadline was for just the SCRD or whether that was the deadline for the public to comment. So,
yeah, Director Lee.
I really believe that the solution to this is one that should have been already in place, and I believe that we should have a stakeholder working group, which Joint Provincial, Shishalt Nation, the SCRD, and some public representation and other stakeholders being business. I hope that this discussion that we do have can lead to that prior to the decisions being made, because the whole issue is the fact that the local perspective isn't being given during the planning stages, and therefore the planning stages should not only define the actual reconciliation project, but also how it's rolled out, so that it's rolled out in a coordinated and friendly manner that everybody can celebrate. So we need to fix it, but hopefully we can work on that after the presentation, or maybe the presentation itself will suggest that. I don't know. I'd like to hear thoughts.
I think it might also be appropriate in making these invitations and working with Flinro on the presentation, reaching out to Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, also reaching out to the Shishalt Indian Government District as well. And that way we'd be able to get a better feel for how both of these concurrent separate processes relate to the foundation agreement and how it all fits together and rolls out, and what the opportunities are for comment. So we can make sure that we extend the invitation to all the parties.
Okay. Anybody else want to? Nobody down there? All right. Anybody down there? No? Okay. Thank you for your Director Kroll. No, I'm going to say thank you first. Thank you, Dean, for being so proactive and engaging in getting us some timely information on that. Go ahead, Director Kroll.
I was just going to suggest that because of areas on ENF, a lot of that area is included in the Squamish Nation, that any engagement should include them as well, because it's sooner or later it's going to come from them as well, and we might as well be proactive.
Director McMahon.
yes, I agree. And I understand that on the Sea to Sky Highway there are Squamish language signs, so It seems like perhaps we're getting left out of this, as usual, being on the wrong side of the inlet, but sure.
Alternate Director Howard?
Perhaps the Squamish Nation doesn't want to be associated with the highways of the quality that we have in our communities. My observation.
Director Lee, you had your hand up.
I did want to mention that the Area Residents Association, in their letter to me, mentioned that exact issue, that it would sure be good to have consistency from the Squamish territory through the Sechelt and through to the Slam as well, so that our travelers are presented with a common way of finding signs all the way on the highway. So that's one of the things I think that if they had consulted with the SCRD and the local people, that would have probably been part of the consideration on the sign design. And I'm not sure we shouldn't just ask for the signs to be delayed until it's fixed, but hopefully that discussion will be happening as well.
Okay. Director McMahon?
Oh, it just got me wondering what happens if the Slam and then the Sechelt have different names for the same place. Like, how do you do that?
All right. Okay. Any new business? No? Director Hills?
Is that item covered off then? Was there an action? We're waiting for a meeting. That was the outcome?
Yep.
And was that a motion required to direct staff or?
Nope.
Nope.
CEO McKinley said that he didn't need a motion to carry forward that work, so. All right. Unless you had anything further? Nope. Okay. No new business. We do have an in-camera session. Can I have a motion to go in camera that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with Section 90(1)A of the Community Charter, personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. Moved? Seconded? All those in favor? Okay, thank you very much. And just before we do that, questions? Sophie?
The last name? G-O-A-D. Yeah. Please don't make me try to repeat that job title.
You'll text it to her?
Yes, at the time that the operating plan is released, BCTS typically offers a staff-to-staff meeting to share maps, answer any interpretation questions associated with the maps, etc. And that is a head start on the analysis that is prepared every year on the operating plan under the terms of our communication protocol with BC Timber Sales. Thank you. Only to the extent that BCTS shared that they would be sending letters to property owners, as the planner referenced. Thank you.
The letters invited property owners to a one-on-one meeting with BC Timber Sales staff. Those meetings took place March 6th and 7th. And the property owners were asked to limit themselves to 2 people going to the meeting, and there were, I believe, 3 staff from BC Timber Sales there.
That's it? Okay. Connie?
Once the dates have been finalized, it would certainly be part of the agenda of the meeting it's in, which would go out ahead of the meeting. Hadn't given much consideration to how the potential meeting would be broadcast or the presentation would be broadcast. I can have some further discussions with the province on it.
Now that we have this fancy camera system in here, it'd be really interesting if we could split it off as a separate video from the rest of the meeting. Just as a quick reference for people, rather than having to try and scroll through a 3-hour-long YouTube video, right? So, okay. All right. Off you guys go. Do you want to take a couple minutes? Sure. Okay. 5? We've only... All right. Everybody can have a pee break. Welcome back, everybody. We are going to go in camera pursuant to Section 91A of the Community Charter, personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. All right. That concludes our meeting. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved? Seconded? All in favor? Great. Thank you very much.